Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Studio Fusion. I did it. I waited. I waited.
Now it was four, I think. 4, 3, 2, 1.
I was like, I just
What,
about said it, and it was like, oh my goodness, there's going to be a number up here. I'm going to actually wait. I'm going to do it.
You did it good.
Thank you, Martin. So today our topic, I don't know that I'll think of a name of it, or we'll think, I should say we will think of a name by the time we're done. I was thinking odds and ends, but it was inspired by a question from our friend Gail. Oh, I forgot. I'm Deborah, and
I am Martin.
and we talk about all things related to podcasts, whether that's podcasting 2.0, where Martin is the expert, or standard, the basics, as I like to call them, or like sound engineering, things like that, where that's my area of expertise. And this topic is, I'm saying odds and ends, but I thought of it when Gail, our friend, Gail Gardner, shout out to Gail, she asked a question about the copyright message because she was, she's forever the editor, and she looked at the podcast site for one of my podcasts, and she said, well, you have it wrong because it's 2024 and this is 2025. And that's what got me thinking. On all my blogs, I always put the footer, because you know how on blogs you can have your footer and you can change it, you can make it dynamic, whatever. It just will always say whatever the copyright is. So, maybe you started your blog in what year did you start blogging, Martin?
2002.
2002.
And then you could, of course, write from 2002 to the year that you're in. But I often did it the year it was in, and you have to, check when the first blog post was. And in a way, even if you haven't automatically done it or edited by yourself, still the copyright is valid, of course. I think so. Even if you write it or not write it. But it is this small, often you could see on an old site that it hasn't updated, that doesn't have a blog or an active blog. You see copyright, and then it's like 5 years ago, and then that's a bell ringing.
It says they're not.
Are you in the loop, or don't you have a control of your website? Maybe some other webmaster is doing that, or you have forgot it. It's so hidden sometimes.
But it got me thinking as far as blogging versus podcasting, because I know that I spent a lot of time researching this as far as the podcast. And even though it's easy to think of the two as very similar, they both involve websites, they both involve content, all this kind of stuff.
It's very similar.
It was, where did I learn about this whole thing where it needs to be the year that you started and not updating? Because on my websites, I always try to make sure it's current, and I do that by saying like 2002 to 2025, or a dash, or something that kind of says, hey, I started at this time, but I am current. Because I want people to know I'm changing it, like you said, Martin, that I'm changing it all the time. But you know what?
I would be a devil's advocate there. If you have done lots of podcast episodes and have been doing it for a long time, at least in the past, I don't know which number it was, but say that it was, I don't know how many hundreds, 300s or something like that, episodes. It was not listed on Apple Podcast because they had a maximum.
Yeah, so I remember that. It was like 300 or
So it's a bit strange, but often it's we call it web host for sites and blogs, and you call it like your podcast hosting company or the sound hotel or whatever, audio hotel. And often they should have it in like default, some settings when you set up for your podcast. Somewhere it could be, because you could have copyright, but you could also put it in these Creative Commons, or because that in the future I think when, for example, you have a copyright, but how about the guests when you do the splits?
Right.
The content that they are saying, of course, they have copyright for, so it's all these questions popping up. Or if you have
and then you have trademarks.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing that people get that mixed up with copyrights and registered trademarks, which by the way is different. You can actually claim trademark. I learned this from a lawyer. You've met Tom. Tom taught this this 2 years ago. He was telling me you can go claim trademark. At least anything I'm saying is only what I've learned in the U.S. So I don't know for other countries, but in the U.S. you can claim the TM, the trademark, but you can't go put the R with the circle around it
No.
unless it's actually registered.
So that was a good. I have never trademarked anything or copyrighted, but if you have been a long-time blogger, you could claim that if like the blog title or your nickname or whatever, or what you are writing under. But you could show that I have been blogging 10 years, so this is it's my domain, so to speak. But then of course, if it's somebody that have a local copyright or another trademark, it's hard to, I think, battle anyway. But
well, that's a hard one, like you said, with the the trademark, you could try to claim that one because that's not registered, but the registered trademark, like the U.S. is not going to let you register something that someone else has already registered, and that's why it's a registration. But you remember that problem I was having on Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, with the whole thing where, I mean, the lady actually took my picture, not took my picture, Snap took my picture, but the graphic, and she's like, oh, I found that somewhere on the internet. Excuse me, you found it because you grabbed it from my image, and fortunately X came through for me, because I went over to my wall where I have the only painting, because I know the lady that painted it for me. I took a picture of the painting, I sent it to X, and I took a picture of the registration of that painting because it's registered art, and I took a picture of the back where it's registered art and sent that to X, and they backed me up on it, so the lady had to remove it. But it was like, lady, you didn't just find this as stock photo. If you did, they're violating my rights as well. So that's where I learned all about this trademark and registered trademark and all that.
And that may be some topic for the future, how you could check that. Probably different tools out there. But I remember I helped Jan Cox and Alan Forkum, Cox and Forkum, editorial cartoonist. That it was that they had a cartoon called the Bloggers Not, the Shakespeare quote similar, to do or not to do, blogging or not blogging. And then I saw it floating around that bloggers have used that and not giving them credit. So I could then direct them and make a comment on their blog and saying, do you know that you have used a cartoon here that is
that's ours, and you need to give credit.
So that's but that's a good thing, and also when you listen to it as a listeners, it could be good to know what kind of year and copyright it is. When you listen, I think that's the issue, because you could have a podcast and for certain reasons you could pause it, or you could take a break or not. And what do you do then between the years and the pauses? And it's good for the listeners to know when it's published. I think that sometimes it's pretty hard to see. You find something and you think it's fresh and new, but it's old, and you try to find the latest. So sometimes with this so-called the sites, maybe it's more common here in Sweden or Europe, but sites that collect RSS feeds and then put it together.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to see when was it originally published. So that's something to think about also.
Well, I know for the answering Gail's question, I gave her this big long answer, and I won't give the long answer that I gave Gail, because I was really I'm always in a detail-oriented, but anyway. But as you can imagine, because you know, Martin, that like the way I do the RSS, speaking of RSS, the RSS feed for the podcast, by the time the validity, and if you guys are wondering, you can go back to one of our earlier episodes, the valid RSS, the validity episode, and you can kind of get an idea. But by the time I go through all that process, I probably clicked I think 5 times. And then if you consider, if you're doing like 365 podcasts for a particular, or episodes for a particular podcast, and then you have to update the copyright for all of those, and you do 5 clicks on all of those, and then you've done 5 years. I mean, I was like 15,000 clicks, and I thought, I'm not doing 15,000 clicks. That's not counting the typing of the year, the pasting. That's no. Nobody's going to do that. Yeah. So I think that's why you've got this differentiation, because with blogging, you really can just change the footer in most websites, whether it's WordPress, whatever you're using, you can change the footer. But podcasting, we don't have to go in the whole description, but it's a little bit different as far as how it functions, because you have media file, the whole thing. But this I did remember, as I was explaining to Gail, all of a sudden it hit me. It's like, where did this come from? You researched this, Deb. What did you know, who was the authority? I got it from IMDb, because when I was putting this podcast, Studio Fusion, on IMDb, which it is there, guys, so you can look it up and you can follow it there.
Cool.
When I put Studio Fusion there, they asked for the year that the show started. And that was what they considered for the copyright. So that's why I thought the copyright for the show is when the show started. Now, if all of a sudden we decided that we were going to start Studio Fusion in Spanish in Spain, and we start that this year, that version is 2025. But I'm sorry, I was just listening to me. But the episodes themselves, each episode can have it has the date of the episode. But the show then has the origination date.
Yeah, I've been thinking of that now when you're talking about it. I wonder how it is with the regular newspapers in paper format. That's often on the headline, or how do you call it, the masthead. They say it established this year or whatnot. But I don't remember if they publish it, because it's so often it is the date on the paper on the first page. If they put anything about that regarding copyright. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's something that's discussed a lot. I think
no.
You have to.
I have something,
Gail,
but that's a bit curveball. But for the future, you have this Alby hub or node. Now I read in April they had a blog post about how you could have an RSS feed. Then also I am not personally so much for paywalls. I think it should be value for value. But you could then use it for RSS feed, like a blog post on, for example, for a podcast, that you have blog post also, or episode notes. And then you could put in, so in order to read more or to support, then you could send value for value or send Satoshis or Noster or something like that. And that's pretty interesting.
Right,
so
that is.
That's something to look into. And then you could say, opening, here is this material is special content and it's copyrighted, but in order to read more you have to pay, and then you could have this so the reader would see it, that what year it is and the date and whatnot. So that's something
a great
to
idea.
think about.
That's almost a whole podcast episode in itself right there, on creative monetization.
Yeah.
I'm hearing something. Do you hear something?
Hello? Yes.
I'm like...
Maybe it's something background, but I don't know. It's from my side or your side, but I hear myself now.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to worry about it. And if we're picking something up, then we'll fix it in the... I shouldn't say that, fix it in the mix, but the... So what are some other odds and ends that we should worry about? There's trademark, registered trademark. There's copyright. There's... Oh, you know what? Speaking of copyright, I found there's someone on TikTok who's using CZ Records, which, hey, whoever gets there first, but their coloring is very similar to ours. Their logo almost looks similar to... I'm not saying they stole our logo, but this is what kills me. The domain that they are using in their description is our website. The website that we have had for over 25 years.
Wow.
So it's like, on one hand,
could it be by mistake that they haven't forgotten like a ending domain, like commercial instead of Colombia or whatever, or that they by mistake, or is it intentionally?
I don't know what they're doing. I reported them to TikTok. I reported them to TikTok because I said, this actually, because everywhere else, and we had CZ Records at Instagram, and that one got hacked, and I reported. It was right at the time that Facebook took over, but so we didn't quite get that over because we tried to go get help from Instagram, and now it's Facebook, and they're not responding. So we've been trying.
It's hard, and I think I wonder if it's maybe for bigger corporation and all with domain now, in order to cover everyone, you have to have lots of money or. But I remember back in the day as a blogger, it was a cool service that you could bookmark or have a placeholder of, like in my case, Lyceum, for example, on all kind of different social networks, and it was a service that you could do work yourself or with the help for a fee. So, but I don't think that's existing anymore. But that was pretty nice feature, because then you could see an overview of how many different social networks it was out there, and if your regular username was free or if it's already occupied.
That was a handy service to be able to see that.
Yeah, it was a couple of them out there back in the day, but then of course it's the business model. After time, it more and more different social networks, so it was hard to keep up. And then some dropped off in popularity and whatnot. But I thought it was a pretty neat service back in the day.
That was really, I liked using that service. I'd wish all these great services, but I think they were low cost or free. And then how did they support themselves as far as some monetization model?
And I think that's maybe not so much about copyright, but to fellow podcasters out there, as they say, like James Cridland has said that, I think, and Sam Satter and others, that we have passed that, but to continue, is it like 5 episodes or 10 episodes or whatnot, and then if you fade out or take a pause or you get tired of it, and then you could wonder about the copyright if you haven't updated your podcast for a long time. I mean, with books and other things, how many years are it that's when it's so-called public domain? Is it? And I mean, it's so it's lots of things to think about, and like services like archive.org and.
I use that one a lot. That's very handy to look things up. Of course, not everything's archived, but they do an awesome job.
No, they recently had a hacker attack, I think. So they lost material.
Oh dear, that's awful.
Things
people do.
In a way, here in Sweden, they had like a plan to document, have a archive and document everything that's online, like online publications and websites and newspaper and magazines, but I think it's it's hard to do that. But similar,
it takes a lot of storage, tons of storage to do that.
Because when we had our philosophical magazine, we had to send that to a certain university libraries in Sweden, because that they should have it in their archive.
Right.
Every publication that have been, and there it was with copyright, but and you saw it, and it could be that people could then loan it, borrow it, and read it at the library. So
to answer your earlier question about the TikTok site, I really think that was out of ignorance. I think they were, because their motto was very similar to ours.
Okay.
And I think it almost seemed like it was wishful thinking, like it was a very new account. It was like wishful thinking of, this is what we want to be, and we would have this.com. And it's like they didn't, it seems like, I don't know this for sure, like they didn't bother looking it up to see if it existed. Because our site, csaidrecords.com, has literally been in existence since 1998. I think I looked it up, and when we registered it, 1998, 1999, somewhere in there. Whatever it was, it's even longer than what, like for the business license, they don't even go back that. It's longer than that period of time. So, I mean, and that was part of the thing I wanted to prove to TikTok was, look, our business license covers this domain here. But so I think they did it out of ignorance. But
and there you have that like an end maybe note that like Apple is pretty strict about in the artwork and so on. What you could say, for example, nothing with podcast in a way, or iPod, or their trademark and registered product names and whatnot. So, but also when you think about it, if there are like 4 million podcasts out there, then of course how many are active? But to come up with when there's a new podcast, to come up with a unique podcast name, that could be pretty challenging.
Oh, definitely.
Because you could search and find, maybe you don't find any exact like a double name or a copy, and then later on you find out, and of course different languages, and so that's a
good challenge. That's a good challenge, like a call to action.
Yeah,
is to come up with either to take a moment and see what you are doing for your podcast, if you have a podcast, as far as copyright, like what's your strategy? Do you change the year every year? Do you change the year every date? Just check what it is and share that with us. And you can do that at our community site, studiofusion.club. Or I like your challenge as far as coming up, although I think that's a repeat of one of the challenges that we had before, call to action, but that's okay. Find a site. I know they exist, and maybe I'll look for some and help you guys out and put it in the show notes. There's one that someone sent me in an email as far as a site to help people find names for their podcast. So that would be another call to action, to come up with a unique name for your podcast.
Yeah, great.
So, some odds and ends. And if you guys have any ideas for more odds and ends, please send them to us or come to the community site and let us know what you'd like to know about on Studio Fusion, and we'll talk about it.
Yep. Great.
Sound good?
Yep.
Thank you for thank you for joining us. See you same time, same place next week. Or the next week. Or the next week.
Cheerio.